Time is the greatest gift we can give and receive. As we turn the clocks back this fall, Bristol Myers Squibb is recognizing oncologists who help give patients something extraordinary: more time. The Time Back campaign celebrates those everyday heroes who are working tirelessly in the pursuit of potentially helping give patients more time to experience key moments, like seeing a child learn to ride a bike or a long awaited vacation. As we turn back our clocks, let's pause to thank the doctors who make a difference every day. Discover more about the Time Back campaign and join Bristol Myers Squibb in celebrating the physicians who give the gift of more time at bms.com/timeback.
The reality is we need more men to step up, and if we want better men, we have to be better men. But there's just no getting around it. Men of my generation are not paying it back, both with supportive policies that put more money back in the pockets of young people, and two, just getting more. I think the ultimate expression of masculinity, you take care of yourself, you get strong, you get economically viable, you take care of your family, you take care of your community, but the ultimate expression of masculinity is to take an interest in the life of a child that isn't yours. And there's not enough of that type of masculinity in our nation right now. It should be common, expected societal norms that the moment a boy does not have males in his life, that we move in and we figure out a way to get him male mentorship.
Scott Galloway, the uber-popular podcaster, professor, and best-selling author, has emerged as a thought leader on all things boys, men, and masculinity. He's got a new book out. It's called Notes on Being a Man, and he tells the story of growing up and becoming the Scott we know today. He also shares some advice to young men who may feel lost, lonely, and misunderstood. This issue, I know, has been on your mind for a while.
Yeah.
Now you've written a book about it, Notes on Being a Man, and I'm curious how this started to percolate in that brain of yours.
I think it was just the data. I remember reading. Actually, the moment it started was back in, I think, 2020. I don't know if you know the name Alex Kearns, but there was this 19-year-old sophomore, I think at the University of Kansas or Kentucky, and he was trading options on Robinhood, and he got a series of errant messages saying he owed $60,000. And it ended up they were wrong. So furiously emailing customer service, couldn't get a response back, and decided to end his life. And the note he left was, didn't want to saddle my family with this kind of money.
I remember this story.
Yeah, it's very rattling. And I kind of went down a rabbit hole. I reached out to the family.
And this was like an all-American kid, right?
No sign of mental illness.
Yeah.
I mean, and
I remember this.
You see this kid, and if you have boys, you just see your son, right? And I started looking at teen suicide. And if you go into a morgue and there's 5 young people who died by suicide, 4 are men. And the stats just get crazier from there. Young men are 3 times as likely to be homeless, 3 times as likely to be addicted, 12 times as likely to be incarcerated. And there's just a lack of empathy for them, which is understandable because of the disproportionate unfair advantage that I received. You know, the best decision I ever made was being born in the 60s, a white heterosexual male. And if you look at what happened from 1945 to 2000, America, with 5% of the world's population, registered 33% of the world's economic growth. So you take 6 times the disproportionate accretion of wealth to a small number of people, Americans, and then you further cram it into the 1/3 that are white, male, and heterosexual. I just had unfair advantage. And because I had unfair advantage, what I find is there's a lack of empathy for young people who don't have the same advantage as I had. So whenever I talk...
So they're basically being blamed for the sins of their fathers.
People look at me and they're angry, understandably, and they hold a 19-year-old accountable who does not have the same advantage as I did. It was 40-60 female to male college admittance. This year, it's going to be 2-to-1 female to male college graduation rates. Young women own more single women own homes in the U.S. than single men. In urban areas, young women are now making more money than men. And by the way, this is a collective victory. But when we saw it was 40-60 women to men in college, we said, and women, by the way, were on the rise. We said, okay,
40,
if
60 men to women, right? 40.
back then
Oh, 40, 60. Sorry. Go ahead.
it was 40,
Yeah.
60 men, female to males. We decided if college is the upward lubricant of a society, we need to do something about this. And they weighed in with Title IX, which was the right move. Now that it's worse than that, skewed the other way, and men are headed in the wrong direction, there's no discussion of anything resembling some sort of affirmative action for men. And by the way, I think that's probably the right decision. I think we need programs that help all young people, because I think it would just get too politicized. But there's a general feeling that young men don't have problems, that they are the problem. And again, I think men my age have a debt. I think we have an obligation to advocate for policies that start putting more money back in the pockets of young people. Katie, the average person our age is 72% wealthier now than they were 40 years ago. The average person their age, under the age of 40, is 24% less wealthy. So should young men be paying the price of my advantage? So the numbers are stark, obvious. If there was any group in America killing themselves at 4 times the rate of the control group, we'd weigh in with programs. Walk down the halls of NYU, Go Girl, women in consulting, black women in investment banking, women's support groups. Find me a poster anywhere that's a support group for men. And yet they're the ones that are struggling hands down the most.
At the same time, you mentioned all the strides that women have made, Scott, but then you look at like some of the still pathetic numbers, like the number of female CEOs, for example, right? And the wealth gap between men and women that still exists. So it's sometimes it sounds like you're suggesting we've already reached parity and then some, but would you concede that there are many areas in American life where there is not gender equality and we still have miles to go before we sleep, so to speak?
So what I would argue is empathy is not a zero-sum game. And that is, civil rights didn't hurt white people. Gay marriage does not hurt heteronormative marriage. And we can still acknowledge the huge obstacles that non-whites and women still face, but there's some nuance. So for example, when women decide to leverage their ovaries and have kids, they go to 77 cents on the dollar. We still have not figured out a way for women to maintain their professional trajectory while having children. We're the only country in the G7 that doesn't have universal child care. Until 2 years ago, I think there were more CEOs named Bob than female CEOs in the Fortune 500. So by the way, it's parents' fault for not naming their daughters Bob.
I don't know if it's Bob. I thought it was
Is it Ron,
Jim or
Rob,
Bill,
Jim?
or I can't remember.
Something
but
like
yeah.
that. So I don't think there's any acknowledging, I don't think there's any denying that women still have real issues. I talk a lot about big tech. Big tech preys on the insecurities of teenage girls, and you can directly correlate self-harm from when social went on mobile.
Right. I mean, you look at Jonathan Haidt, and I know these statistics are terrible for boys and men, but if you look at, the anxious generation, you see girls, preteen girls have their suicide
Terrible.
rate has just
Jumped.
Yeah.
So it's interesting though, just as many women attempt suicide as men, it's just that men are quote unquote better at it because they're more comfortable with gunplay. Anyway, I don't think that, I want to acknowledge there's still huge issues facing the Hispanics and black families have average net worth of 20,000, white families 160,000. So I think it's pretty easy to acknowledge there's still an apartheid, an economic apartheid in the US. When you normalize it for education, it's even. So that kind of takes us to solutions, and that is, the majority of the solutions I see do not target men exclusively. I think it's too political. I don't think we'll make progress. I think there's an understandable gag reflex from women and progressives. What I'm suggesting is that the programs I'm mostly suggesting, that some are specific to young boys, but the majority of programs I would suggest that most people can't argue with is that my generation has taken their credit card and leveraged it for our prosperity. And when you have young people can't afford a home, they can't afford education, and they have the most godlike technology that is linked to 40% of the S&P is companies, 40% of the value of the S&P is companies who have a profit incentive and have linked shareholder value with polarization, division, and sequestration. I just don't think there's any arguing that young people are struggling, and that struggle among young people seems to be disproportionately impacting young men, which in no way takes away from the urgency and challenges. I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary. My mom, and I speak openly about this, terminated a pregnancy at the age of 47 when I was 17. Had she not had access to family planning, I couldn't have gone to college. I would have stayed home and gone to work. So the fact that we are now moving backwards around some components of women's rights, to me, is unthinkable. And so I also feel a real debt to be involved and an advocate for bodily autonomy, because one of the reasons I'm here is I got to go to UCLA, which inspired this upward spiral of prosperity. And it's a little bit uncomfortable and awkward to talk about. But if I'd been a 17-year-old only child, the son of a woman who'd had to carry a child to term, this was 1983. That wasn't fucking Google. My mom wasn't going to get 6 months off. She was a secretary. So I couldn't have gone to college. So I'd like to think that this isn't men versus women. This is what I'd call liberal versus illiberal thought. This is empathy and recognizing that we can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Well, I kept thinking of the phrase zero-sum game, when I was reading this, because it does seem as if inevitably, particularly in our current culture, one group is pitted against another group.
100%.
And so in this case, it's men against women. And, as a producer at 60 Minutes told me my first day on the job there, someone else's success diminishes you, someone else's failure enhances you. And I was like, that is a really fucked up philosophy.
That's awful,
yeah. And I think your point is, if men do better, women don't have to do worse.
Women in our country aren't going to continue to flourish if men are flailing. And what I would argue is, you said something really powerful, men versus women. The genders have done a great job of convincing themselves it's the other gender's fault. And the way I would argue, so a lot of people, there's an understandable gag reflex that says, Scott, where were you when women were really struggling? And I would argue, when we had Title IX that tried to level up women in college, 97% of our elected officials were men. So clearly some men are on the side of a forward-leaning society. I don't see it as men versus women. I see it as empathy versus non-empathy, or what I'll call liberal progressive thought. Because there are men who are very much on the side of advancing the rights of women, and there are a lot of women. You know who my biggest supporters are of this work? Mothers. And the emails I get, young men come up to me and they appreciate the advocacy for young men, but hands down, the cohort that has advanced this dialogue and stopped people from calling me Andrew Tate with an MBA is mothers. And the email and the kind of narrative goes like this. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters, 1 son. 1 daughter at Penn, 1 daughter in PR in Chicago, and my son is in the basement vaping and playing video games. It's mothers that really see what's going on here. So I think that the greatest alliance in history is not NATO, it's not between moderate Republicans and moderate. The greatest alliance in history is between men and women. And I think there's 7.5 billion points of evidence that it's a great alliance. So what do we need? We need young men to celebrate the progress of their sisters and their mothers, but we also need women to realize the struggles facing young men are real.
Why is that? Why is her son in the basement vaping and playing video games, and her other children are successful, going about their lives?
It's a confluence of a bunch of things. So first, let's just start with biology. A boy's prefrontal cortex is literally 18 months behind a girl's. This is the gas on, gas off. Executive function, stop playing video games and start studying. So 2 seniors in high school applying to college, a boy and a girl. The girl's basically competing against a 16-year-old girl. 7 in 10 high school valedictorians are girls. What you have is, once we level the playing field, girls blew by boys. And the educational system, I would argue, is biased against boys. Think about the behaviors we encourage in school. Sit still, be a pleaser, raise your hand, be organized. You just described a girl. When you have single-sex schools, boys end up with double the amount of recess time. If a boy is twice as likely to be suspended for the exact same behavior as a girl, 5 times as likely if it's a black boy. 70 to 80% of K through 12 teachers are women. And who is a woman more likely to advocate for? Someone who reminds her of herself or that rambunctious boy? Very few men, even
I know you're going to say very few men are teachers,
are
right?
teachers.
Yeah.
And the other thing we have to acknowledge is that if you look at the single point of failure, if you had to point to one thing, the single point of failure when a boy comes off the tracks and has problems the rest of his life, it's when he loses a male role model through death, divorce, or abandonment. Boys need men in their lives. The moment, and what's interesting is girls, when they lose their dad, they have the same outcomes. They might be a little bit more promiscuous because they're looking for male attention in the wrong places, but the same levels of college attendance, same income. They're fine.
It's funny, when my husband died, my girls were 6 and 2, and I remember saying, I'm so glad that I don't have a son, because I thought that they would thrive or do much better with a single mom than a boy would. Because I just thought, I feel the same way if like a mom dies and they have daughters, and it's just so hard to not have that. I don't know why, I just thought of that.
Your instincts are correct. When a boy loses a male role model, at that moment, he becomes more likely to be incarcerated and graduate from college. So what the research shows is the following, is that while boys are physically stronger, they're emotionally, neurologically, and mentally much weaker than girls. And we don't know if it's because women have had, throughout the ages, had to menstruate or give birth, that they're just quite frankly tougher. But I'll give you a really rattling statistic. 2 15-year-olds sexually molested, a boy and a girl. Neither crime is less or more heinous than the other. The boy who's sexually molested is 10 times more likely to kill himself later in life than the girl. Boys are weaker. And so there needs to be a societal zeitgeist or norm that when a boy loses a male role model, we move to put men in his life. And even saying that boys needed men in their lives evoked this gag reflex a few years ago. What you're saying, women can't raise boys? I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died a secretary a lot of my life. But absolutely, boys need men.
Who did you have as a role model, given that you were, I guess your father, you had an absentee father,
Yeah.
right? Did he leave you guys?
Yeah, my dad's been married and divorced 4 times. He started his 3rd marriage when he was married to my mom, his 2nd marriage. Not a bad man, but not an especially good man. And moved to Ohio. So my dad wasn't very involved in my life.
So who did you look to as a role model?
I had coaches, so I played sports. My mom was very good about getting men involved in my life. 2 of my mom's boyfriends stayed involved in my life, even after they broke up. I had a guy down the hallway show up one day and say, do you want to come horseback riding with me and my girlfriend? And he used to take me out on weekends. When I was 13, I walked into a stock brokerage with $200 that I got as a gift. And I met a stockbroker named Cy Saro. And we bought 13 shares of Columbia Pictures, and he gave me my first lesson in stocks. And every day for the next 3 years at Emerson Junior High, I used to go to the phone booth, put in 2 dimes, and I'd call him, and he'd talk to me about the markets. Like, the stock is up today, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a big hit. And to this day, Cy is now 83. We text each other. So I was really fortunate. Men filled in the void. But men have to step up. And they're not.
Why aren't they? Why aren't men helping each other more? I mean, you talk about friends, you talk about loneliness and social isolation. Just anecdotally for me, women are much better about building a community, supporting each other. Is it just the way that men are conditioned and they're not comfortable kind of forging those kinds of bonds with other men?
I have some theses, but I don't have data on it. But the data I do have is the following, is that in New York, there are 3 times as many women applying to be big sisters as there are men applying to be big brothers.
I know.
And I think some of it is the following. I think there's a taboo and a suspicion of men who want to be involved in a boy's life. I think because of the Catholic Church and Michael Jackson, if a single guy in his 30s who has fraternal and paternal love to give and thinks I could really help a 14 or a 15-year-old boy, I think he's worried he's going to be suspected of being a pedophile. And also, there's a certain self-consciousness that if I'm not a CEO or don't have a degree in adolescent psychiatry or I don't have my own kids, I'm not qualified. And I can tell you, as someone who does coach young men, it is so incredibly easy to add value. They make such bad decisions. Just asking a series of questions can help them avoid so many bad decisions, and just showing up and being present in their life adds huge value. So the reality is, we need more men to step up, and if we want better men, we have to be better men. But there's just no getting around it. Men of my generation are not paying it back, both with supportive policies that put more money back in the pockets of young people, and two, just getting more. I think the ultimate expression of masculinity, you take care of yourself, you get strong, you get economically viable, you take care of your family, you take care of your community. But the ultimate expression of masculinity is to take an interest in the life of a child that isn't yours. And there's not enough of that type of masculinity in our nation right now. It should be common, expected societal norms that the moment a boy does not have males in his life, that we move in and we figure out a way to get him male mentorship.
How do you actually make that happen realistically?
Sure.
It sounds great and it sounds important and definitely worthwhile, but how do you do that with policies, with changing societal attitudes? How does that happen?
Well, the answer is yes, all of the above, but there are common sense solutions to all this. I think we should redshirt boys in kindergarten. We should start boys at 6, girls at 5. Boys are just biologically and mentally behind girls. You have kids. When my 15-year-old has a party and there's boys and girls, the boys are nice, but they're dopes. They don't look you in the eye. They're just dopes. Some of the girls there could be the junior senator from Pennsylvania. I mean, it's just so obvious the girls are just way ahead of the boys. Red shirt boys, hold them back a year. More men in K through 12, encourage more men, more after-school programs, more sponsorships for sports. I think actually religious institutions can play a big role in this. I think any freshman class at a college that isn't growing its freshman class size faster than population, that has an endowment over $1 billion, should lose its tax-free status because it's decided it's no longer a public servant, it's a hedge fund offering classes. 20% of their certificates should be non-traditional vocational, everything from nursing to specialty construction. I think mandatory national service would be a huge benefit for all Americans, but especially men. Tax policies that, again, stop sucking so much money from young to old. A commitment to build 8 million houses in the next 10 years, and eligibility and low interest rate loans for young people. In sum, the incumbents, specifically older people and politicians who have benefited from this sucking sound of young capital to old people, we just need to put more money back in their pockets, right? As soon as you graduate from UVA or UCLA, we like the admissions rates have gone down. When I got into UCLA, the admissions rate was 74%. It's now 9%.
Oh, I know. I could never get into UVA
Well, we all say
today.
that, but quite frankly,
It's true.
that probably means your daughter isn't getting in, or you don't have a daughter. But
I have 2 daughters.
Oh, you do?
I have 2 daughters. Yeah,
2
that's
sons
what
and 2 daughters.
No sons. What
You
I
said
was
that,
saying
2
earlier,
daughters.
what I was saying earlier is I'm glad that I had 2 daughters who lost their father versus 2 sons who lost
Thank
their
you.
father. Yeah.
So I'm part of the problem. I'm an educator. What do you think the faculty does when the dean announces we've rejected 91% of the applicants? What do you think the faculty does?
They cheer.
They applaud, which is tantamount in my mind to a homeless shelter bragging that he or she turned away 9 and 10 people last night. We're public servants. We're not Chanel bags. So more freshman seats, more vocational programming, mandatory national service, tax policy, a truly progressive tax policy that puts money in people's hands, mandatory national service, low-cost housing. It's pretty simple. Make it such that young people can afford a home, go to school, and have the economic viability to start families. 40 years ago, 60% of 30-year-olds had a child. Now it's 27%. It's because the young people don't want families? No, they can't afford them.
And in some cases, they don't want to bring a child into the world we're in right now. I've heard that from plenty of my daughter's friends.
I think that, and I don't have research on that, I think that it's like when we say our kids don't need college, it's usually because we don't think our kid's going to get in. I think that's wallpapering over the disappointment that they may not be able to find an emotionally or economically viable mate.
I'm listening to all these, sort of your prescriptive advice and thinking, Jesus, that's the exact opposite what's happening in our federal government and in our country's leadership.
Well, this is,
I mean, you sound like Zoran, kind of.
yeah, that's not the comparison I'd want, but
Why
I see what
not?
you're saying. Well,
Okay.
we can talk about Zoran, but I don't think rent freezes are going to bring down rent. I think they're going to take them up, and I don't think I don't think government-sponsored grocery stores is the answer. But anyways,
Yeah.
his emphasis on affordability is absolutely the right one. Yeah, I mean, I think his message is the right one. And I also want to be clear. I think Democrats could take a lot away from what an excellent campaign he's run. But I think there are common sense economic policies that would reduce the cost of education, massively decrease the cost of housing. We've entered into this rejectionist luxury positioning. There's no reason. Dartmouth has an $8 billion endowment. They let in 1,100 people, which is what a good Starbucks serves in a weekend. They could have 11,000, Katie. They're in the middle of goddamn nowhere. They could leverage their faculty. They have about 14 faculty for every one person that actually teaches. They could open a satellite campus in the South. We need to move back to our roots of loving unremarkable kids and leveling up all young people, which I believe will disproportionately impact men. And here's the thing we don't like to talk about. Men mate socioeconomically horizontally and down, women horizontally and up. 75% of women say economic viability is key to a mate. It's only 25% for women. Beyonce could work at McDonald's and marry Jay-Z. The opposite is not true. So there's some knock-on effects from young women blowing by men economically that we have to acknowledge. And that is, women say how many women do you meet say, I can't find a dude? No, they can find a dude. They just can't find a dude they want to mate with. And that's because young men aren't nearly as economically viable as they used to be. Many of the jobs that were on ramps to the middle class have been hollowed out. They aren't getting the certification because they're not nearly as good at school. And they're also, quite frankly, some of their behavior is pathologized. And that is, just to be provocative here, we've pathologized men's romantic and sexual interest. No guy wants to be that guy who approaches a woman and it's not welcome, right? No guy wants to be the creep. Yet 80% of women say they expect men to initiate romantic contact. So I think we need to stop pathologizing romantic interest and celebrate it. What do I mean by that? I think a guy I didn't see my partner and think I'd like someday to get a better deal on life insurance. I looked at her and thought I'd really like to have sex with her. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because it should motivate a man, and it can, to dress better, to smell better, to have a plan. The secret weapon in mating: demonstrate a kindness practice, demonstrate excellence, be funny, show resilience. I think these are wonderful things. And then competing against that effort is what is increasingly lifelike porn. So what we have is a generation of men who don't feel like they need to take the risk to make friendships because they have Reddit and Discord, don't need to navigate the corporate bullshit of a corporation because they think they can make money trading stocks or crypto on Coinbase or Robinhood. And Katie, why would they go through the effort, the expense, the trauma, the resilience, the demonstration of skills, the demonstration of excellence, the demonstration of kindness to get a date, establish a relationship, persevere through the much finer filter that women have because they are choosier for good reasons, such that they can have their own romantic relationship when they have near lifelike porn at home? And the reality is, we have the most talented, deepest pocketed companies in the world taking advantage of an immature brain known as a young man, sequestering him from life, not taking risks, trying to convince him that he can have a risk-free, low-cost facsimile of life. And he wakes up at 30, not all of them, but many of them, obese, anxious, and no relationships, and none of the skills he needs to operate across a variety of scenarios. We are evolving a new species of asocial, asexual males. It's as if we've decided to plan our own extinction such that we can keep the NASDAQ high with 10 companies who are in the business of sequestering and polarizing.
So what do you do about that? Those companies specifically. There's nothing.
I'm hopeful. I don't like to. I'm a catastrophist, but I've learned I want to talk about what could go right. One, no synthetic relationships for people under the age of 18. Age gate, social media, no phones in school, schools.
Which is starting to happen.
Which is starting to happen. Remove Section 230 protection for algorithmically elevated content. I'm not talking about censorship, but if you put out videos on how to kill yourself, and then because those videos seem to enrage people, you elevate them beyond their organic reach, you're no longer a nascent platform, you're a media company. And there's no reason that those media companies shouldn't be subject to the same scrutiny you're held right now. If you were elevating content on your podcast platform and they could tell it was resulting in young girls self-harming, you would be in a world of trouble. But these multi-trillion-dollar companies are considered nascent companies, and they have absolutely no liability.
Well, they're considered publishers, right? They have the pipes. They're not considered publishers. Let me correct that. They're considered basically the infrastructure,
Right,
but they don't
that's right.
control the stuff that's going through the
They're
pipes
not
and
considered
going out,
media
right?
companies.
Which to me has always seemed insane.
Makes no sense at all. And some boring stuff. Antitrust. I think they need to be broken up. But there are common sense solutions. I mean, higher tax rates. Corporations are paying the lowest tax rate since 1939. It's about tax enforcement. There's $750 billion a year that's uncollected from the top 1% because the Republicans who are smart, the biggest tax cut ever is to neuter the IRS because they don't have the money to audit anybody. We should have an alternative minimum tax, meaning if you make over a certain amount of money, you pay, say, at least 40%, no matter what the deductions are, because the tax code over the last 40 years has gone from 400 pages to 4,000. And quite frankly, those incremental 3,600 pages are meant to screw the middle class and make it such that people like me can start a company and have what's called 1202. The first $10 million of proceeds from a company I start and sell is tax-free. I mean, there's just so many goodies in there for rich people. The average tax rate of the 26 wealthiest families in America is 6%. And what's interesting is people say, well, the rich don't pay their taxes, the kind of Bernie, Elizabeth Warren side of the aisle. That's actually not true either. The workhorses are the ones that get screwed the most. So say you live in New York and mom's a baller. She makes $2 million a year working at Skadden. Dad is a chiropractor, thriving practice, makes $600,000, $2.6 million. Ballers. They have to live in probably a city in a blue state. They're probably paying 52 or 53% income tax. But say dad's company, say he makes the jump to Lightspeed and it gets bought by a private equity firm and he gets shares in that private equity firm and it gets sold for $30 million, his tax rate plummets to the high teens. So what we've decided is that sweat is more noble than money. So the tax rate is progressive until you get to about the 99th percentile. But once you make the jump to Lightspeed, if you get the gold medal, we decide to give you the bronze and the silver. And also corporations are just not paying their fair share. But it's more about loopholes than it is about tax rates. We could fix all of these problems. And by the way, through most of the 20th century, the top tax rates were 60 or 70%.
Right.
So the workhorses, the people making a lot of money in current income, I would imagine you're in this category, make an exceptional living, but it's all W-2 reportable income.
I haven't made a salary in 7 years, so.
Well, maybe, so it's not impacting you.
Yeah.
But I make my living. When I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars in my 30s and 40s, I was paying 40-something tax rate. Now that I made the lump jump to Lightspeed, I got very lucky. I've sold some companies. I make the majority of my money now investing in companies and then selling stock. Living in Florida, my tax rate has plummeted to the high teens. That makes no sense. That's nothing but weaponization of the tax code to create greater income inequality. And this results, if there's one statistic, if you had to find ground zero, the epicenter of the earthquake that's rocking our society, it's the following. For the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. That's never happened in our society. 60% of men under the age of 25 are either living at home or will be living at home. And when you're a young man or woman and you're not doing as well as your parents, there's rage and shame across the entire household because most likely your roommates are reminding you every day that you're failing. And then 210 times a day, that young person gets notified that they're failing with faux wealth porn. Basically convincing
Social
them,
media.
basically saying to them, if you don't have a hot boyfriend and you're not on a Gulfstream and you're not seeing black coffee at Ibiza, you have fucked up. So what do you know? They're anxious, they're depressed, they feel bad about themselves. They feel 1 in 2 people our age feel good or very good about America. It's 1 in 10 young people. And it's because I keep using their credit card, right, to buttress my lifestyle.
Oncologists are often the central guide for patients and families facing a cancer diagnosis. Let's hear a bit more about what they specifically do, how they support patients and families, and why their work matters so deeply. Joining me to talk about the role of oncologists is Dr. Monica Shaw. She is Senior Vice President of Global Oncology Commercialization at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Thank you, Katie, so much for having me here today to discuss this important topic. It's really incredible to think that a single oncologist will probably have to give that bad news 20,000 times in their career. It's important to remember that it's not just the bad news that they give, that they're often also responsible for letting people know about those additional precious moments of time that people will be able to spend with their friends and family.
I read that in the mid-1970s, the 5-year relative survival rate for all cancers combined was about 49%, and it's increased to around 69% in recent years.
And that's why we're really excited to bring this new campaign, Time Back. It's important to recognize that they're also part of the positive moments of the journey.
Dr. Monica Shaw, thank you so much.
So, Katie, if you or your viewers would like to learn more, please come and visit us at bms.com/timeback, and you can learn more there about our commitment to oncologists and the time back that they potentially can give to patients.
As we've heard, oncologists' work extends far beyond medicine. It's about the valuable time and key life moments they can help give back, and they deserve our deepest gratitude. Time is the greatest gift we can give and receive. As we turn the clocks back this fall, Bristol Myers Squibb is recognizing oncologists who help give patients something extraordinary: more time. The Time Back campaign celebrates those everyday heroes who are working tirelessly in the pursuit of potentially helping give patients more time to experience key moments, like seeing a child learn to ride a bike or a long-awaited vacation. As we turn back our clocks, let's pause to thank the doctors who make a difference every day. Discover more about the Time Back campaign and join Bristol Myers Squibb in celebrating the physicians who give the gift of more time at bms.com/timeback. Let's talk about the 3 Ps, because, when it comes to figuring out how we address all these issues that you raise in the book, you say men should protect, provide, and procreate. Tell me how you decided on these 3 kind of descriptions.
Well, the most important thing is they all begin with P.
You like alliteration.
That was the key. Yeah, reproduction didn't work. Well, horniness sounded weird. Look.
I don't see where horny is protect, provide, and procreate. Well, I guess that's under horny.
Procreate,
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
That's key. Trust me, it's central to it. Look, and I'm open to pushback. I may not have this right. The book initially started as me trying to do the algebra of masculinity, and my first chapter was on testosterone. I thought, I'm not an endocrinologist. So the book is really about where I got it right and where I got it wrong. And quite frankly, more about my failures trying to be a man. And then trying to develop a code for young men that they could lean on to help make their decisions. Some people get their code from their religion, from their work, from their family, from the military. I think you can even get a code. My first code really on how to behave was I worked at Morgan Stanley, and I got a lot of kind of rules from that about how you behave in a corporate setting.
But I imagine your mom gave you a code too.
You know what my mom gave me? My mom was a great friend. I got that from her. But more than anything, Katie, my mom every day, explicitly, implicitly, communicated to me that I was wonderful. I was a tall kid with bad skin, mediocre grades, totally unremarkable. But I think as a parent, I think if you communicate every day that your kid is wonderful, they can't help but start to believe you. And I think that still rests inside of me. But the 3 Ps, I'm trying to think of a framework for masculinity to help serve as a guide or a code for young men. The first is provider. I think in a capitalist society, and I'm not saying this is the way the world should be, but I think it's the way the world is, I think you got to be economically viable as a man. And I think you should assume at the outset of your career that at some point you're going to need to take economic responsibility for your household. And by the way, sometimes that means getting out of the way and being more supportive of your partner.
I was going to ask you, what about if you marry a woman who, as you said, is a baller and your job just, You're a middle school teacher
So when
because you want more men in teaching, right?
when I was in 2000, when I was living in New York in 2010, I was an academic making okay money, not great money. My partner was working at Goldman Sachs. So I got up with the kids. I was home for bath time. And I'm not trying to be a hero here, but that's being a man. That's recognizing that that's taking economic responsibility for your household. But the reality is, even if you were to have total equality of opportunity in the professional world, more women are going to decide to take a disproportionate amount of the responsibility for the kids. They just are. And I don't think a bad place to start as a man is to assume I need to get the certification, I need to get the skills, I need to show the focus, the drive, the discipline to be economically viable. Don't be the dude ordering a bottle of Grey Goose at 2 in the morning. Have a plan, show discipline. The reason women like guys who are in shape and muscular is not the muscles, it's not the aesthetics, it's that it reflects he has discipline and he shows up and he knows how to commit to something. And in a capitalist society, regardless of how many subscriptions to the Atlantic or the New York Times you have, you are going to, as a man, be disproportionately evaluated based on your economic viability. By the way, women are unfairly disproportionately evaluated on their aesthetics. So we both have biases against us. But I think it's a good place to start as a man to assume you're going to need to take economic responsibility for your household and be a provider. Second, the whole point of prosperity, the whole shooting match, is not such you can buy shit. It's such that you can immediately pivot to being a protector, right? The only times I've ever felt a sense of purpose, that I have meaning, that I have a real sense of peace, is when I'm at home, my kids are safe and warm and asleep, my partner feels noticed and secure, I can give some money away, I can protect them. I'm strong, I'm prosperous, and that's given me the ability to protect people. And one of the real shortcomings, I think, of our leadership and who should be perceived as role models for masculinity right now is they have entirely skipped the masculine component of protection. And that is, you may not understand the transgender community. You may not agree we need third bathrooms. You may not believe a transgender woman should be able to compete in NCAA sports. But if you see a community being demonized, your reflex muscle memory should be default to protection. Full stop. Women should cross the street because they see men on the other side of the street. We have to train boys from an early age that if you aspire to be masculine, it means being a protector. What are the most masculine jobs? Fireman, cop, military. What do they do at the end of the day? They protect. We are bigger, we are stronger physically. Who breaks up fights at bars? Big, strong men. Who starts fights at bars? Guys who are insecure and are not masculine. It also goes beyond physicality. You hear people criticizing others behind their back. Your reflex reaction should be to protect them. You can absorb blows because you're big and strong. You don't need, if someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't need to be like the douchebag I was when I was a younger man and speed up and cut them off to restore balance to the universe.
I sometimes do that.
Well, that's anti-masculine behavior, Katie.
I'm sorry.
Or these are all my own failings, and I know these well. I met the Delta 1K customer.
Well, I don't cut them off because that would be too scary, and I'm afraid of road rage. But I do like flip them off, and I do sometimes like ride their bumper if they really make me mad. Actually, more often than not, if they're riding my bumper, I slow down because it's so obnoxious.
Well, okay.
Is that masculine?
I'm guilty of all these things. Some people would say we're just being assholes. But also, the person at the Delta counter checking you in is rude. I used to get back in their face like, don't you know who I am? And I don't do that. I don't think you need to do that. And the two people that will always serve as role models for young men will be the President of the United States because he's the most powerful person in the world, and the richest man in the world because we're in a capitalist economy.
Oh, great. Trump and Elon.
Well, this is where I'm going with this, all right? Being sued concurrently by two women for sole custody of your child because you haven't seen that child, that is anti-masculine. Cutting off aid to HIV-positive mothers, there's nothing that could be more anti-masculine. Mocking people less powerful than you. I mean, there's a very basic thing here. Punching down is about the least masculine thing you could ever do. You're a protector. That's your job. You are physically stronger, and if you are smart enough to ever register prosperity, the whole point of prosperity is such that you can move to protection. And then the last thing is procreation. We touched on this. I think that desire to procreate is fire. It can be harmful if you begin objectifying women, if you engage too much in porn, if you see women as one-dimensional. I think it's reckless, and I think it can be very damaging. But if you use it as a means, let's go back to coaching these young men. Katie, they typically say, I want to, I say, what are your goals? Let's reverse engineer. Let's outline your goals and let's reverse engineer the activities to get to them. Usually it's I want to move out of my parents. That's usually number one. Number two is I want to start making some money. And say we're able to get to those two things. What they do under their breath and what they really want is they really want a girlfriend. And the first thing I ask them is I say, would you have sex with you?
They do. They say yes every night. I already do it.
And they have sex with themselves. Anyways, but the point is, do you smell nice? Do you make an effort to look good? Are you in shape? Do you have a kindness practice? Women are drawn to kindness. There's research on this.
Kindness, intelligence, which is also humor, because you have to be smart to have a good sense of humor.
Well, you forgot number one. You're going in reverse order. Number three is kindness. Number two is intellect. And the fastest way, by the way,
is being clean?
No, the fastest way to communicate intellect is humor. And just because I get the sense you probably have very progressive viewers and I want to offend some of them, this is my imitation of a woman. I'm laughing, I'm naked. If you can make a woman laugh, she will go on a date with you. The number one, though, thing we don't like to talk about, the number one source of sexual attraction is the ability to signal resources. And we don't like to admit that. That is still number one for women. That's the bad news. But the good news is it doesn't mean you have to show up with a Range Rover or a Panerai. It means you have to have your shit together. It means that you have to signal that at some point in the future, you will garner resources because you're responsible, you're smart, you're hardworking, you're a decent person. But those are kind of the three things in terms of sexual attraction. But I think leveraging that desire to have a relationship and to want to have sex at some point are wonderful things if channeled in the right way.
Let's get back to resources, because I think some of the takeaway from your book is Scott Galloway is really obsessed with money. And I'm curious if you feel you're too obsessed with money.
I think everyone needs to take a regular audit of their addictions. So let's define what an addiction is. So it's continuing to engage in something despite it having a negative impact on other parts of your life, right? I love alcohol, I love marijuana. I'm really good at them both, Katie. I've got more out of alcohol than it's gotten out of me. I'm good at it. I'm a better version of me, a little bit fucked up. But when I started at Morgan Stanley, I cut it all off. I'm able to manage those things really well. The things I'm addicted to are the affirmation of strangers. I care too much. I don't know if this is on YouTube. I'll go on, I'll look at the comments.
Yeah, this will be on YouTube.
But if the comments are really negative, it'll bum me out more than it needs to, and I'll be checking my phone when I should be engaged with my boys. That's an addiction. I believe what I'm saying. I know I get it wrong sometimes. I care too much about what strangers think about me, and it gets in the way of my quality time with my loved ones. That's an addiction. Hands down, my number one addiction is my addiction to money. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. My mom got very sick. It was very humiliating for me not to be able to take care of her at a level I wanted to. Money was a thing for me growing up. And so I've always been very focused on economic security. I did nothing but work for 30 years to get economically secure. And I have trouble getting off that hamster wheel. I have a tremendous amount of my own self-esteem and relevance and sense of worth tied to the number in my head that it is money. I'm cognizant of it. I got very lucky. I'm done. Unless I screw up again, and I've done it a few times, I'm done, but I'll check my stocks on my way out of here. I'm always looking to make more money. I should be spending more time with family and friends. It should occupy less of my headspace. I've had trouble getting off that hamster wheel.
So do you think that you have emphasized that too much perhaps in this book? I was looking at a Reddit thread, and it was called Scott Galloway Needs to Stop Talking About Men and Boys. And one person wrote, Okay, and I'm not saying this because now that I know you're obsessed with comments, I feel bad, but it's interesting because I wanted to see, some of the holes people were poking into
Sure.
your arguments. And someone wrote, I'm a therapist and I see a ton of young adult men and boys. Let me tell you, I can spot a Galloway watcher within about 5 minutes. There is absolutely an algorithmic pipeline of left of center men who have the presence of mind to reject the Peterson, Rogan, Tate Shapiro brand of masculinity sensei. Is that how you say it?
Sensei?
That is more misogynistic, outwardly toxic, and shaming towards women. Galloway, to his credit, packages his brand of bullshit on improving men and not demeaning women, but he does so through the same tired and harmful ways of internalizing shame to be weaponized as a motivator to compete in the mating market. You'll never be enough until you win capitalism and then have a family and then provide for that family. And this worked for him, so he's happy to preach it. This poster goes on to say, it's reckless and often unsustainable when approached this way. People who rush to achieve these benchmarkers in life often do so in haste. If I just get a girlfriend, any decent girlfriend, then I'll have a wife and be happy. Divorce Speed Run 101. Now you've got a man who derives his value from his partner, and suddenly jealousy, anger, and resentment start to creep in when that relationship goes through natural ebbs and flows. Same thing with placing all of your value on your career. Lose your job, and now who are you? You're in my office trying to rebuild a sense of self from the ground up is who you probably are. One of the final thoughts of this poster is improving self-worth and self-esteem is good. Build it from within. I just thought that was a very interesting comment about sort of this provider part of your prescription, and it just made me wonder, are you focusing too much on this money because of perhaps your own hangups with financial wealth?
I think that's a really thoughtful comment, what she wrote, and I'll take it to heart. I think there's a kernel of truth in it, because when it hits me hard, and I don't like it, which probably means there's some truth in it. The retort would be, will me finding self-worth pay for my health insurance for me and my kids? And I'm not suggesting you need to be a baller and make millions of dollars. I'm suggesting in a capitalist society where in America we believe in winners and losers and the safety net is near the ground, that you need to be economically viable. And that might be a decision. Look, unfortunately, I've lived to work for a long time, such that I could get to economic security because I didn't think I have trauma around it. That's my way. I acknowledge it may not be the right way. I think there are a lot of people who decide they want to work to live. They move to a lower cost neighborhood. They have decent jobs. They don't need a Range Rover. They don't need to go to Saint-Tropez. They want a decent house. They want to coach Little League. They want to go to church. More power to them. What I'm suggesting is that people have an honest conversation around their expectations economically and the sacrifice required to get there. When I survey my kids, when I say my kids, my students, about 80+% of them expect to be in the top 1% economically. Some of this is proximity bias because they're
I was going to say, yeah.
But if you talk to young people and you ask them, talk to young women about what they expect their partner to make to be an economically viable male, it's usually about the top 2 or 3%, just to qualify to date him. So those comments resonate with me because you go to your own playbook around what's worked and you think that works for everybody else. I acknowledge that some of my insecurities have been channeled too much into thinking money's going to solve my problems. But what I would also suggest is that young people need to have an honest, sober conversation around the life they expect to have in an economy that has become... My dad, who's an immigrant, always said America's a terrible place to be stupid. I think what he meant to say was that America's a terrible place to be unlucky. It is. I have been there. I know what it's like to have, your mom discharged early after cancer treatment, and literally not knowing what the fuck to do. Literally. Can't get her back in a hospital, can't do certain things for my mom as a son. Nurses are $35 an hour, and I got $700 in my checking account. So a lot of my life, only person who ever took care of me, and I got 20 hours of nursing care before we're out of money. And this society doesn't give a shit. So I'm all for the middle class find purpose in other things, but have an honest conversation around what it means to have some dignity in America and what's required to get there. But I want to be clear, I am too focused on money. It probably it skews my views, but I do think young people need to have an honest conversation around the requisite trade-offs to be economically viable and have some dignity. Because unfortunately in America, money means life. Rich people live on average 7 to 10 years longer. They have access to health care, they have access to dignity. The top 1% are protected by the law, but they're not bound by it. The bottom 99% are bound by the law, but not protected by it. That is absolutely wrong. It's unjust. We need to change it. And it's the way America is. So I accept that criticism. It hits hard, quite frankly, which probably means there's truth in it. But feeling good about working on myself and having self-actualization, I think that's great as long as you can pay for your health insurance.
Let's talk about the manosphere if we could for a minute, because, oh, by the way, I know you've never been in therapy, but I just feel like
I could use it?
No, I feel like I was playing the role of the therapist for a second there.
Yeah.
That was very self-revelatory, and I appreciate your honesty about that. Let's talk about the manosphere for a second, because I think a lot of the negative associations with masculinity come from that space. Tell me, observing people like Charlie Kirk, the late Charlie Kirk, Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate types, why do you think they have captured the imagination? Of so many young men, why do you think they have become these kind of media messiahs?
I don't think it's they capture their imagination as much as that young men feel seen. And so, for example, to the right's credit, the far right's credit, they recognize the problem before anybody else. They said, our young men aren't doing well. And the problem is that I think some really unproductive voices entered that void. And generally speaking, their answer, their solution, it starts off fine. You have real issues, just like other special interest groups have issues. You deserve empathy. You deserve to be seen. Take control of your life. Be fit. Be action-oriented. All these things are wonderful. But then it comes off the rails because the solution on the far right usually has something to do with, let's go back to the 50s, where non-whites and women had less opportunity. And the most dangerous thing about the manosphere is to believe that there's an inverse correlation between women's ascent and men's descent. And when I know a young man has come off the tracks is when he starts blaming immigrants for his economic problems. No, the reason why you can maybe someday afford a house, eat good food at a reasonable cost, and have someone take care of your parents at a low cost is because of immigrants. The reason we've had so much economic prosperity is because of immigrants. And when you start blaming women for your problems, your romantic problems, then it's increasingly difficult. That's the dude I can't speak to, right? And that's where the manosphere went. At the same time, let me hold the left accountable. I went to the Democratic National Convention. It was a parade of special interest groups. Not one person talking about the group that has fallen further fastest in America, young men. If you go to the DNC website, and I'm going to take credit for this because they've changed it since I pointed this out on CNN, it has a section called Who We Serve, and it lists 17 demographic groups ranging from women, the disabled, Asian Pacific Islanders, seniors, just goes down the list. I counted it up at 74% of the population. The only demographic it doesn't mention and call out under Who We Serve is young men. And so when you say you're advocating for...
I'm surprised they didn't say working class voters, and those are generally, not always, and there's plenty of female working class, but if you talk about sort of manual labor type
Well, they
jobs.
had unions. But unions are now 9% of the workforce.
Yeah.
Okay, so the only group not in there was young men. It was literally everybody else. And when you say you're advocating for 74% of the population, you're not advocating for 74% of the population. You're discriminating against the 26%. So I don't even think young men went to the Republican Party. I think the Democratic Party left them. And I think on the left, the general consensus around how to solve the young men or the masculinity crisis is the following: act more like a woman. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's actionable for a young man. You don't have problems, you are the problem. And if you were just more in touch with your feelings and acted more like a woman, you'd be fine. I don't think that's especially constructive either. There's got to be a middle ground where if women can embrace the wonderful attributes of femininity, that young men can grasp and appreciate the wonderful things about masculinity.
Which, and you say toxic masculinity is an oxymoron. You feel like it's been co-opted, really, right?
Have you heard the term toxic femininity?
No.
Because we acknowledge that the female attributes are positives. So are masculine attributes. There's violence, there's cruelty, there's an abuse of power. Those couldn't be any less masculine. Masculinity, again, comes down to providing, protecting, and procreating. And I think these are when you have Russian soldiers pouring over the border of Ukraine, you want some big dick energy. There's an award called the Carnegie Award that gives awards to people who literally rush into a burning house. It's given to people who risk their own lives in the moment to save someone else they don't know. The rushing into the burning house. Of the 81 awards given, 75 are men. Men are much more risk aggressive. Now, sometimes that can be reckless, but sometimes it's valor. But men have built the biggest buildings in America. Men are better in combat. You also need women who, quite frankly, are more measured and make better decisions. If I were to say women make better doctors and lawyers, and there's evidence that's true, and that they make better managers because they have an easier time reading the room, people nod their heads and clap. If I were to say that on average, and this doesn't mean you should in any way limit access, men make better combat soldiers and sometimes make better entrepreneurs because they're more risk aggressive, I hear, I don't feel safe around you. So we can acknowledge that everyone should have equality of opportunity, but there are wonderful attributes around being born a female. And by the way, embracing your masculinity or femininity and celebrating both sides in no way is meant to say that a significant portion of our population is non-binary. They deserve the same rights and same opportunities as anybody else. But just as we've leaned into really appreciating and celebrating what it means to be a woman, why can't we do the same thing and say to our young men, you're wonderful. We appreciate your strength. We appreciate your value. We appreciate your risk-taking. We appreciate that you are willing to be aggressive. You are willing to approach people and have crazy ideas and try and put men on the moon and approach women that are out of your league and apply for jobs. We celebrate it for women. Why wouldn't we also celebrate it for men? And when I think of the happiest, most productive households in the world, they bring a mix of female and masculine energy. And by the way, some of that masculine energy can be brought by women. People ask me who my role models are for masculinity. I said Margaret Thatcher. I thought she showed tremendous strength and risk aggressiveness.
Is this what my husband means when he says I'm like the dude?
Well, these attributes are not sequestered to people born as male or female. I'm personally, my close male friends are very feminine. I'm drawn to men who take care of me, who are more nurturing and more sensitive.
Maybe because of your dad.
Who knows? We're going back into the therapy session. But just as we've celebrated, as we should, feminine energy, we should celebrate masculine energy and also acknowledge that the greatest alliance in history isn't NATO. It isn't between moderate Republicans and Democrats. The greatest alliance in history is between men and women.
Let me end by asking you a question one of my friends wanted me to ask you. She said, your focus in this book, and so much of what you talk about these days, is the male loneliness crisis. But I think to a lot of women, it feels like their rights, which never even reach parity with men to begin with, are being stripped back even further. We have an accused sexual predator in the White House, leading the Pentagon, and on the Supreme Court. So what do you say to women who feel like, okay, I don't want men to fail because that's bad for society as a whole, but why should we worry about them when there's so much work to be done? And her point was they don't seem to be very worried about us.
I would argue that person doesn't have sons. And let me be clear with respect to, you're talking to someone who was on MSNBC and was giving reasons for why we elected an insurrectionist and a rapist. I feel the president is a rapist. And Steve Bannon has called for the Trump administration to sue me for saying that. I think it is insane that we have someone who has been accused of sexual assault 28 times and is rolling back bodily autonomy. The first time rights have been taken away in our country is when women lost, when Roe v. Wade is overturned. First time in our nation's history we have taken a right back. So I am this person's ally. I do not think this is a zero-sum game. I think we can fight for women's rights. I think we can celebrate the progress they've made. And what I would ask is that young men recognize that our sisters and mothers making progress, we should be the afterburners to that progress. We should absolutely celebrate it, promote it, and again, be the chaser to that. At the same time, I think women need to recognize that young men are struggling and we need their help and we need their empathy. But as it relates to a president who is a sexual predator and is denying women's rights, I am so fucking with you. I am moving back to the US and I'm going to be part of that fight. This is not a zero-sum game. We can acknowledge that women still face huge issues, especially when they decide to leverage their ovaries. They go to 73 cents on the dollar, right? There's still huge issues facing women, but at the same time, we can walk and chew gum at the same time and realize that women are not going to continue to flourish. The country is not going to survive if we have young men who are failing. And the reason we put an insurrectionist and a rapist in office is the following. If you look at the groups that pivoted hardest from blue to red from 20 to 24, it was one, Latinos.
And young white men.
Number two was people under the age of 30. They are not doing well. If they're not doing well, they want change. The most interesting was the third group that pivoted hardest from red to blue, and it was women age 45 to 64.
I mean, blue to red.
I'm sorry, blue to red. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. Women 45 to 64. And my thesis, Katie, and I'm curious if you validate this, is that's their mothers. Because another thing we don't like to acknowledge.
I know, I've read that you said that. It might even be in your book.
Another thing we don't like to acknowledge is there's still a lot of women in this country who will vote for who they perceive is best for their husbands and their sons. And if your son is in the basement playing video games and vaping, you don't give a flying fuck about territorial sovereignty in Ukraine or transgender rights. You just want change, even if it means chaos. The most dangerous person in the world, responsible for the most unstable societies in the world, are young men who are broke. And we are producing way too many of them. And there's no reason we can't restore the same progress and ascent of women while also acknowledging that we need to value our young men and stop pathologizing them and realize that if you walk into a morgue and 4 out of 5 who died by suicide are men, then there is trouble in Mudville.
Well, it's a very depressing note to end
Sorry
on,
about
Scott.
that.
But
all these problems are
no.
solvable. All these problems are solvable. Let's go back to horniness.
No. This has been a great conversation. The book is Notes on Being a Man. Scott Galloway, great to finally spend some time with you.
Yeah,
Thank
likewise.
you so much.
And I generally appreciate the pushback. And what I would ask is if you're willing is to respond to that woman on Reddit and say that I am open to how I can be better at this and that I am her ally.
Well, you can answer her on Reddit.
Well, I'll go on. I don't go on to Reddit because I find it so rattling.
Yeah, some of the comments didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I thought hers was kind of germane, and that's why I sort of interrogated you about your view on money and making money. And Adriana, who produced this
this interview was saying, you know, there's something called provider
provider pressure.
Oh,
where,
yeah, I think it's a huge part of anxiety.
and how do you, I think what she was saying, young men are, and Adriana was pointing out, if young men are so happy and they're also faced with provider pressure, like, how do you find the balance of being out of the house, which you say you should really only use your house for sleeping, but how do you do these other things that are so important to happiness while also promoting provider pressure, or, adding to it, I guess?
Can I make 2 more comments?
Yeah, sure.
The first is around provider pressure. When the woman in the relationship in a marriage starts making more money than the man, erectile dysfunction, drug usage triples, and the likelihood of divorce doubles. I think a lot of that is because of provider pressure, and that as a man starts to feel insignificant. But I also think we need to acknowledge that there's a lot of women that deep down still expect the man to be the provider and are less sexually interested in him when he fails to be the provider. And I don't care how many subscriptions to the Atlantic or the New York Times you have, I think there are exceptions to that. I hope the world gets better on this front.
I was going to say, don't you think it is? Because I know, I faced this in my own marriage when I was on the Today Show, and I married an incredibly smart, talented lawyer, but you make funny money on television, right? Or if you're in a position like I was in, right? And it was really hard for him. But then this was in the 90s, and I feel like it's more and more the norm where the woman is out earning her husband.
17% of households. But I would argue your situation's especially anomalous. It sounds like your husband was a baller in his own right.
He
just
was,
wasn't
but
making, he just wasn't making millions of dollars.
What do you
being
call
America's
it? Compare and despair stuff, right?
The other thing I just want to add is that I think what we're terrible at the left, in what I think is a very dangerous time for us, where progressive values are really at risk, is not align with imperfect allies. I'd like to think most of what I'm saying is right. I know some of it is wrong. And what I worry about, what I don't like about the left, is that we look at each other and say, you're holding the gun wrong. We're both on the same side. We're allies. We agree on 90%, but you're holding the gun wrong. So off with your head.
There is a lot of that, isn't it? Like self-righteous judgment.
There's a purity test. I agree with most people on most things. With most of our progressive wing of the party, I disagree with them on Israel. I'm a strong advocate for Israel, and I find that the right says, I find that on the left, you get treated like an apostate if you don't sign up for the full Monty of the most extreme narrative feedback. So what I would say, and I'll go on to Reddit with this woman, is I can tell she and I are allies. And I'm open to coaching, but we are in this fight together.
Scott Galloway, this was really fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Katie.
Time is the greatest gift we can give and receive. As we turn the clocks back this fall, Bristol Myers Squibb is recognizing oncologists who help give patients something extraordinary: more time. The Time Back campaign celebrates those everyday heroes who are working tirelessly in the pursuit of potentially helping give patients more time to experience key moments, like seeing a child learn to ride a bike or a long-awaited vacation. As we turn back our clocks, let's pause to thank the doctors who make a difference every day. Discover more about the Time Back campaign and join Bristol Myers Squibb in celebrating the physicians who give the gift of more time at bms.com/timeback.